Greetings Scorpio, and a warm welcome to your in-depth year 2024 astrology and horoscope forecast. This is for the sun or the ascendant. I'm going to give you a brief outline of how I'm going to structure the video. In October 2023 we have two eclipses. The first on the 14th is a solar eclipse in a very tender part of your situation. The second is a lunar eclipse in your opposite sign of Taurus. But those two energies are going to be very active as you make your way into the new year and going to be reverberating through the first 3 or 4 months. So we really need to investigate those in detail. Also, at the turn of the year, we get that exact moment that year 2024 begins, and that creates a snapshot in terms of a solar return of all the planetary positions, and the influence of that will play out over the following 12 months. And there's one standout exciting detail that I can't wait to tell you about. The midpoint between the moon, which is how we receive and how we're receptive and desire nurture and security, and the sun in the sign of Capricorn is in your sign, and it also angles brilliantly to another player, which is really enlivening for your prospects this year. But also, as we start this year, your ruler Mars, your traditional ruler Mars, is in a very close relationship with Mercury, the planet of communication, which is in retrograde. And they're both in the subsequent sign to yours of Sagittarius, as is Venus. This has some real promise in terms of your financial situation for the following year, but it will require some care. Now, one of the big features of year 2024 is that all the retrogrades are in fire signs, bar one, which will be in Virgo. And so that means there's going to be a lot of passion washing around. But for you, each of those fire signs actually is positioned in a house which is quite earthy. So your attitude towards practicalities and resources is going to have a lot more desire, I feel, linked to it this year. But obviously with Mercury retrogrades, care is needed. There can be glitches. Now, your other ruler of Pluto is your modern higher octave ruler, starts this year in your third house of everyday communications, and it's going to move on the 21st of January into the sign of Aquarius. Now, I think it's highly likely that you will be changing your home in some way in the early part of this year. It could be some kind of cosmetic change, could be something to do with new work units or bathroom units, or it could be that you're going to try and move altogether. Then again, the changes may be much more at an emotional level. It's a very deep influence, Pluto, as you know, and it's to do with this year, for much of this year, about how you feel about things and your immediate environment. It is also going to be switching back into Capricorn later in the year, briefly, but for the most part it's in the sign of Aquarius for over 30 weeks this year, whereas last year just 11. We also need to look at the progress of Saturn and Neptune, which are in house 5, very much where you can showcase your talent, have fun, be creative, be passionate. But of course Saturn can be restrictive and Neptune can be dissolving, so that's something I need to look through with you. But what about the eclipses that we're going to encounter this year? Well, the first up occurs on the 25th of March, and that's going to see an opposition with where the solar eclipse was on the 14th of October. And this is very much to do with the more psychological part of your existence. But then on the 8th of April, we have a total solar eclipse in the most practical part of your situation. Don't be surprised if you look to change your job, your work, or your everyday routines over the next 6 months. But Mercury is pretty close to that eclipse, but in a retrograde, so that's going to be intriguing too. Now, Jupiter is the planet of fortune traditionally, but it's about spirituality and faith. and also where we're expansive and optimistic, and that's in your sector of relating through to the 26th of May, but forges a stunning alliance with Venus in the third week of May, which could be very auspicious for your relationships. But essentially all through the start of this year, Jupiter, because it's in such a strong angle to the Sun and also the Moon at the turn of the year, known as a grand Earth Trine, is very, very auspicious for you through those first months, and that could be very exciting for your connections with other people. It then moves into your sector of deeper changes, the 8th house, very much in keeping with the energy of your sign, but it could be very good for your financial situation in the second half of this year, or if you're a more entrepreneurial Scorpio who wants to make your resources work that much more effectively. Now through July, August and September we do have a Mercury retrograde season, which is a little bit complex because Mercury moves into the sign of Virgo, then it goes into retrograde, but back into the sign of Leo, which is to do with your connection to the wider world and success, but possibly also to do with training and job applications, presentations. But then it moves back into your sector of friendship. But then on the 18th of September, we have a new eclipse series, and this goes across the axis of Virgo and Pisces, which for you, Pisces 5 and the Virgo position, house 11, to do with your future, your connections to others, but also your friendships. But the 5th house, where that lunar eclipse occurs, is where Neptune is, and it applies to that particular lunation. So whoa, that's very, very sensitive. What is that going to tell us? We then have the solar eclipse, which occurs, the annular solar eclipse, back in the sign of Libra, repeating the journey that began in the middle of October 2023. But this one is very close to Mercury, but both are in your 12th house, and Mercury in the 12th house does have some implications for the last quarter of the year. Now, your traditional ruler is going to see you pushing very hard to raise your profile towards the end of this year, but also goes into a retrograde, so we need to look at that. And then in a rather synchronistic way, Mercury ends up back where it started, in the sign of Sagittarius, and also in retrograde, and that is going to be an interlude which takes us through to the middle of December. So some tangles around finances, or maybe your values are going to go through some changes this year in terms of your thinking. So much to tell you about. Please stay with me for more. I'd just like to share with you a very special opportunity. If you're watching this video in year 2023, you can order your year 2024 personal horoscope forecast based on your unique birth data, and I will prepare for you the rest of year 2023 free of charge. If you're ordering within year 2024, you will get a full 12 months from the exact time of your order. You will also, my special package, get 30% off and your character analysis report, your life roadmap. This will help you to understand the patterns that have repeated themselves in your situation, help you to seize upon the opportunities and get a much more intimate understanding of some of the challenges and how you can work with them future forwards in a more effective way. Please see beneath this video for more information. So Scorpio, let's first of all look at those two eclipses which occur in October 2023 but are so influential in the early months of the year. The first occurs on the 14th in the sign of Libra, very much about balance, fairness and relating. But it's also very close to the South Node, a very karmic influence. And for you, this represents the 12th house, which is a very tender, sensitive part of the zodiacal journey. It can be about the parts of life that we're a little bit reluctant to grapple with. Sometimes the shadow side of our nature, our fears, our anxieties, our vulnerabilities. So you're being asked as you go into 24 to be much more aware of these. And if you are someone who's very interested in personal development or healing, natural medicine, or any kind of spiritual sphere, this is going to be a big uplift for you. But also the 12th house can be about the people who don't necessarily approve of how we go about things, but don't necessarily either reveal their hand. So you will need to keep your guard up a little bit around some people's motives in the early part of this year. But the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 28th, is in your opposite sign. It's all about relationships. If your relationships are going, or your key relationship is going really well, I think the energy and intensity around this particular eclipse is just going to make you much more conscious of its importance. But maybe if some things aren't being discussed openly, the solar eclipse can inform the lunar eclipse by bringing some things into the open that could benefit from being aired and ventilated. And if some sensitive matters are discussed, the best way to deal with this is as in an undefensive way as possible, to receive it gently, because that is going to help to give you a lot more information to try to inform what's good for you or the other person too. So you're going to need to integrate those two energies as you come into 24. Part of you is going to be focused on relationships, but I do feel some things that have been pushed to one side may require discussion and in a bit more of an open way to put the spotlight on perhaps some tender issues. However, at the turn of the year, we have the solar return, which provides the backdrop energy for the following 12 months. And on the screen now, you can see your chart wheel. Now, the most exciting thing about this, as I mentioned before, is that we take the position of the moon in the practical sign of Virgo, but friendly location of the 11th house for you, and the position of the sun in the sign of Capricorn in your 3rd house of everyday communication. Well, the balance of those two energies is deposited in your sign. So 8 degrees in Scorpio is the midpoint. This is true for everybody. So that Scorpio energy is going to be the root power for us all in year 2024. Scorpio energy is very transforming, can be a little bit confrontational at times because you do like challenges. Of course, it can be a little bit mysterious, but it's very much to do with evolution and really letting ourselves go when things are changing, even if it feels a little bit scary at times. But if you look on the other side of the heavens, there is Jupiter, just there in house 7, your sector of relationships, and that's just on the 7th house cusp of that midpoint. It's just slightly in the 6th if you're very technically interested in astrology, but that is going to be a really wonderful thing for relationships this year. So although you are going to be dealing with some sensitive issues from that lunar eclipse in Taurus from the 28th of October that feeds into the new year, there's definitely an opportunity to still create something better and more meaningful around your alliances this year and all sorts of relationships. Because if you look at the position of Jupiter at 5 degrees 34 and the position of the moon at 5 degrees 59, they're pretty well in a 120 angle known as a trine, the most enabling of all planetary aspects. But then if we look at the sun, actually the gap between the sun and the position of the moon and Jupiter in terms of 120 degrees is only 4 degrees, very tiny. So we have a grand Earth trine. Earth energy is about tangibility. It's about being grounded in our approach. But the great thing for you, this wonderfully dynamic angle between these three influences. Remember, the Sun trining Jupiter is one of the most fortunate of all planetary influences that you can possibly get. So the 7th house for you is your relationships. The 3rd house is your immediate connections to people in your everyday world. So that can be neighbours, it can be siblings, it can be people in your community, but you also have the moon in the very friendly 11th house. So I feel there's going to be connections this year that are very uplifting for you through this grand Earth Trine, but also through the midpoint being in your sign, but having Jupiter just at the end of its descendant, its 7th house cusp. The challenges? Well, we do have a stellium of energy in the sign of Sagittarius. And you can see that we have the position of Venus, the position of Mercury, and the position of Mars, all in your 2nd house. Mars being your traditional ruler. So Mars being in your 2nd house suggests that your desire to do better around resources this year is going to be very strong. Mars can be about determination, thrust, desire. But you also have Venus in your 2nd house as well. So on the face of it, Venus is not just about relating, it's also about loot and our self-worth. So those three influences look really bright. But Mercury's very close to Mars. What does that mean? Well, I think it means that you're going to articulate your ideas, business ideas, or desire to improve your finances in a very quick, earnest and passionate way. Mercury, planet of communication, applying to your ruler Mars, which brings that more urgent energy to bear. And it's also in a retrograde. So that retrograde energy is going to play out for the whole year, of course, because this is the solar return, which provides an echo for the whole year. But we do have that strange synchronicity that the year will end with Mercury in retrograde in the 2nd house. So I feel that your desire to improve the foundations of your world can come through knowledge, the sign of Sagittarius, maybe even through some travel. But what you're looking for essentially is to improve a sense of security. But Venus in the sign of Sagittarius could be a little bit of a contra energy, because on one hand, yes, it can attract money, but on the other hand, because of the Jupiterian vibe of Sagittarius, it could also see you wanting to splash out. So an interesting contrast there. But let's just look up to house 5, which is your sector of speculation, of pleasure, of joyfulness, of leisure, but also of romance. But the 5th house, where they're located, is very much to do with risk. And if you see, Saturn is squaring to Venus. 3 degrees Saturn, 2 degrees Venus. So it suggests you shouldn't be too carefree with your resources this year, even if you're determined to improve your lot. And that could come down to just how generous you're going to be towards people you care for. It's not to say that you should become absolutely miserly, just a little bit cautious. So if you have spells of really good fortune, just don't let that affect your immediate thinking too much, because the 2nd, 5th house angle is very much about speculation, but it's a square, so it creates tension. So the more censorious energies of Saturn are asking you to be more cautious around risk. But of course the 5th house can also be around romance. So it could be that you could encounter someone this year, or even in an existing relationship, who can seem to run on the cool side when it comes to the more sensual dimension of the relationship. Venus in the 2nd house is very Tauran. It likes touch. It likes to enjoy the good things in life. It's a really lovely location for Venus to be. I must stress that. Just be aware that Saturn slows things down and just cools things off a little bit. But also Neptune's in this area and has been since 2012, and has probably provided some amazing highs at times during that time around your creativity, your passions, perhaps around your love life, but also perhaps some crushing disappointments. And Neptune's in a square with your traditional ruler Mars, and also with Mercury. That square is very dissolving, but also potentially very confusing, because Mars is so impatient at times. In its angle to, in its conjunction with Mercury, that creates a real restless vibe. So you could find yourself being impulsive at times. So Neptune's just saying, along with Saturn, but in a different way to Venus, before you go into any romantic or financial situation, it's important to slow things down, really examine your motives, and just take your time to pick through things and be very systematic. It sounds a little dull. I'm really sorry. I must stress that although Mercury is in retrograde and detrimented at the start of this year, I feel you could end up this year a lot better off. It's just that how it pans out and plays out may surprise you. There could be many a different shift that happens in the year, because these three influences are all in mutable positions, mutable sign, as is Saturn and Neptune. So there can be the need to be flexible about how things will play out, but I feel your determination to improve your lot is going to be very strong, and that can be an asset. Now, the other thing just to tell you about is that Saturn is in an opposition to the Moon. In a romantic context, the Moon suggests that you may want to be more sociable with friends and your personal interests this year. And if you are in a long-standing tie, it could be that at times a partner may feel a bit pushed out by that. Or is it someone that you're involved with is going to change their interest, and it could be you that feels a little isolated at times. And both positions forge a T-square with Venus. So at times this year, I think there could be some expenses around loved ones. 5th house can be children, 11th house can be friends, Venus in the 2nd is money, or it could be that someone could be a little bit disappointed or a bit standoffish, or perhaps you yourself going to want to be a bit more logical about your relationships in general, with Saturn applying to the Moon in the 11th house, which is in itself a very kind of Aquarius position. So a bit more detachment around your romantic situation this year, but important just to be aware of how you use resources. So that gives you a flavour of what the solar return gives you and how that energy will echo out throughout the year. So Scorpio, as the year steps forward, so Mercury moves into direct motion on the 2nd of January. Really important, because this is a time of the year when many of us are looking to snaffle a bargain in the sales, and Mercury remains in its post-retrograde shadow. So if you are trying to do some transactions online, be very, very careful. Obviously, we know there's loads of scams doing the rounds these days, and we all constantly have to stay very much on our wits. Just to say that because Mercury goes through 4 lots of fire retrogrades this year, your passion is going to be aroused at times, which could make you a bit more compulsive. But because for you all of these occur in Earth numbers, so the first one is house 2, the second 6, the third is going to be house 10, so it's all very much to do with Earth signs. So you may find yourself, if you do look for bargains this year, trying to get something that gives you some practical benefit, something that is functional in your home or your everyday life. But that also therefore is a clue of how you could be tempted to splash out on things. So just be conscious of that. But that takes us through to the 21st of January, and your modern higher octave ruler returns to the sign of Aquarius. Last year it was in Aquarius for 11 weeks. This year it's near to 40 weeks. It is going to be working back into Capricorn later in the year. But for the main part of this year, it's really asking you to embrace much more deeply concepts to do with your emotional life, your family situation, where you live, your immediate environment, the sense of peace and tranquility. But of course, Pluto is not always an easy influence to work with. Sometimes it changes things that we aren't ready to let go of. But it moves back into Aquarius on its birthday. It was discovered, initially thought to be the 8th of February, Then they found some old plates from the shots into space and realised it was there on the 21st of January. And the sun moves into Aquarius on the same day, ushering in a big focus on where you live and those more emotional and sensory strands in terms of security. But then in February, Mercury, Venus and Mars, your traditional ruler, are all speeding through Aquarius as well. So it wouldn't be a surprise if you decided to move or to improve or to get something done where you get tradespeople in, Mars, action around the home. So February and March could see some significant shifts in that home environment or within you and how you perceive yourself, life, how you feel about things. Such a profound influence, Pluto. It really, really is. And of course, because it's part of you, you're used to the constantness of the fixed part of your nature, which you really appreciate. But then when change does come for you, it tends to happen in a very dramatic way. But sometimes Pluto will just seem to relieve us of a particular connection, a particular attachment, a particular possession, job, relationship, when we're not ready. And of course the fourth house can be a very tender zone because it is about where we can feel very sensitive. It's really the connection to our feelings in our stomach, so our inner soul, if you like. So big journey begins. You had a taste of it last year, but it's a big journey, and Mercury, Venus and Mars are going to accelerate, along with the sun, the energy that ebbs out from that. So don't be surprised if you're moving or improving or talking about your feelings, expressing your emotions much more strongly than ordinarily people are used to, which takes us back to that solar eclipse on the 14th of October, which is encouraging you to ventilate any fears or anxieties, perhaps even some secrets which maybe you've been holding close to you, which may have made you feel secure and safe in the sense that you thought people might judge you. But if you let them go to the right person or the right people, it could be hugely cathartic. Now, it could be that if it is something to do with your early family life, which wasn't easy, issues of insecurity, perhaps abandonment, loss, perhaps of being neglected or even abuse, it's possible that you may decide to really talk to someone in earnest through this series of Aquarius influences, and encourages you to open up, because the sign of Aquarius is about articulation of ideas, but it's also about needing to find our connection to our own higher self. And if something's blocking you up, this is a good time to try to release it, to be honest. And that takes us through to the end of February, because at the end of February we have a connection between the North Node coming backwards in the sign of Aries, so clockwise, meeting Chiron. This is going to be a very powerful influence for everybody, but for you it's focusing on the sixth house, which can be where we're of service to others. But it also could be where we do a lot for other people because we feel it gives us some kind of identity, but actually we still feel rather invisible. And however caring we are, we don't really feel recognised for it. The sixth house can be very sacrificing in a very lovely way. It's being of service, not servile. But if your work, for example, is an area of your life which doesn't bring you happiness, for example, if you're working with people you don't trust and you don't like the atmosphere, all this energy coming from Pluto, the Sun, Mercury, Venus and Mars in Aquarius is going to make you much more conscious of the atmosphere. And because of that solar eclipse in the 12th house of hidden enemies and hidden energies, perhaps you're going to become much more conscious of where you don't feel that it's quite right for you. You don't really feel comfortable. So that could push you to make some changes. And the thing is, the sixth house can be about jobs. So when we get round to the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 25th of March, we are seeing the counterpoint, the mirror point of the solar eclipse, which occurred on the 14th of October. And this is asking you, do you really feel that you have been demonstrating some of the tender areas of your life, or are you actually finding out that some of the people around you simply aren't those that you can really trust and rely upon? If it is the latter, this lunar eclipse is really going to illuminate that, and it could, of course, be quite painful to realise that. But just be aware that from the 10th of March through to the 15th of May, Mercury is going to be in this 6th house location too, but it goes into a retrograde from the 1st of April to the 25th. So we get a 10-week period of that 6th house energy being illuminated, and then we have a solar eclipse on the 8th of April, which is pretty close to the retrograde Mercury. It's about 5 degrees. In eclipses, planets have to be very close, within 1 or 2 degrees, to be exceptionally affected, but it's close enough to suggest that in the following 6 months, the impact of the eclipse period, you could find yourself going through a series of applications or rethinking about how you structure your life, the job you might do or might not do. Even if you stay in the job you're in, you could be questioning yourself. You may find that you feel a little bit more irritable. You could feel a little less tolerant of other situations and people, which have not been quite right for a while. But that's not a bad thing. It's just making you more conscious of that is how you could feel. Fortunately, Venus is a force for great good through that period from the 7th to the 29th of April, that despite the fact that you may be rethinking certain elements of your situation from a practical viewpoint, Venus is in your sector of relating, and that gives you an opportunity to connect with others, hear different viewpoints, perhaps even have a lovely connection from a romantic viewpoint too. The 7th house helps us to create harmony. So if you are needing to do a presentation or an interview, you could showcase your talents very skillfully. But also from the 23rd of March to the end of April, Mars, your traditional ruler, is in the glorious 5th house of your situation. This is going to give you a lot more self-confidence when it comes to strutting your stuff. You know, you're going to feel gorgeous. You're going to be emanating that in a much more confident and assured manner. But also Mars is going to be then going through your 7th house of relationships, from the 9th of June to the 21st of July. If you really need to put a marker down, even put your in place your boundaries for certain situations and people, that's going to be very, very helpful to you as well. But of course, having Saturn in the 5th house is not really necessarily a bunch of laughs. It's going to be there for another couple of years, so what to do? Well, the key is to accept that when it goes retrograde from the 29th of June to the 15th of November, that the more joyful, social and interactive side of life could slow down a little bit. And also Neptune is going to be retrograde from the 2nd of July to the 7th of December, and that could affect your expectations a little bit. So maybe through those months you won't be so interactive with others, but remember the eclipse pair, starting with the solar eclipse in the middle of October last year, then the lunar eclipse occurred 25th of October, the solar eclipse the 8th of April. They're asking you to grapple with some very profound areas of your situation. So although Jupiter, is lighting up your relationship sector right through to the 26th of May, and you do have that lovely transition of Venus and then Mars twice through the 5th and the 7th house. It can definitely be fun, but in the background you're being asked to think about some practicalities, but also some deeply psychological and even spiritual issues. But I have to say, on the 23rd of May, there is a fantastic conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. The two planets of fortune come together in your sector of relating. Now, if you're single, I can't promise that you meet the love of your life, but certainly if you're active around that time and you did meet someone you really liked, that is a very auspicious date, because of the connection between the two will give you the best chance to take this forwards in a productive way. Now, of course, one of the big things that most of us want to know is, how's it going to work out with the money? And as I've suggested with you, having Venus in the second house at the start of the year can be auspicious, as long as you're a little bit cautious because of the role of Saturn. Also, you have Mars, your ruler, along with Mercury, so your thinking can be very agile, and especially to do with anything to do with perhaps selling online, which Sagittarius energy is very good for, but again, just be aware of keeping it clear because of Neptune. But Jupiter is, of course, intrinsically linked to good luck, and it moves from the 26th of May into your sector of Loot for the rest of this year, which I really am excited for you, to be honest. And I just also want to just outline how Mercury is going to work across those summer months, because it could feel a little bit fragmented at times, because initially it moves into your 10th house of success on the 2nd of July, and it's going to be there through to the 25th, and that could be a time when you really can quite literally make hay. Mercury in the 10th house is good for targeting jobs, writing out applications, perhaps refining your curriculum vitae, that kind of stuff. And of course, could be Mercury online, Leo, can give you more confidence. Lovely. But then it moves into Virgo on the 25th, which is your sector of friendship. So Mercury then goes retrograde on August the 5th in Virgo, so that social situation could be a little bit more affected, but then it inverses back into your 10th house, where it will be for 13 days. So if you are trying to get a new job, or reschedule something, or get your business working in a more productive way, it can be very stop-start. Things will improve when Mercury finally makes its way back into Virgo on September the 9th, but it moves into your 12th house on the 26th of September to the 13th. And that could be a prelude to when things seem to slow down a bit. But also we have that new eclipse series coming in on the 18th of September in the sign of Pisces, which is about your pleasures, but very close to Neptune. So if there is someone you encounter in a romantic context around that time, there may be something that's very mystical or very fascinating or bewitching about that person. But whether you'll ever really get to know what they're about is hard to know, because maybe they're not really necessarily going to reveal enough about themselves. There could be something that seems to be held back and rather intangible. But then Mercury makes its way through your sign from October the 13th through to the 2nd of November. You can get more on the front foot, gain traction, but then it moves back into your second house and goes into a retrograde from the 26th to the 15th, 26th of November to the 15th of December. So you're back into thinking about the money, but also Mars punches to the top of your chart from the 4th of November through to the end of the year. It's just that it does go into a retrograde from the 6th of December. So that is going to support and push back on any of those frustrations that you may have had with Mercury in the summer, and you really can make a big bid to go for a major prize as the year comes to a close. It's just that all the time you may find that some kind of snag comes up around the practical side of things. So patience is going to be really a virtue this year, Scorpio. But with the midpoint in your sign, that gives you so much potential to express yourself powerfully. Having Jupiter opposite means that you can amplify whatever you're trying to do and gain some fortune at times. Just be aware that your passion is going to be aroused around communication, but you're wanting to see tangible results, and they may just always seem to be a little bit slower coming to you than you would really like. But this is definitely a year when you could find yourself with a new job or some kind of new approach, and that's augmented by the final solar eclipse of the year, which is an annular solar eclipse on the 2nd of October, which once again just reminds you of the importance of staying in touch with that side of your nature that maybe you feel most vulnerable about, and knowing that if you can embrace that and integrate that into who you really are, particularly with Mercury beside it at that time, you are actually going to end this year with some very clear understandings of what you want to achieve, even if you may have changed your mind a few times through year 2024. It's been a real honour being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you all the best for the new year. Please like, comment, share or subscribe.